In this episode, I'm going to go over 5 sports psychology tips for kids. This will be great for you if you have a youth athlete, especially if the youth athlete is getting serious about their sport or they're experiencing nervousness, fear, you see them underperforming during games, or even if you just want them to get a leg up on the competition. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, a mental performance coach who works with athletes from around the world on building a stronger mental game. With him, I work about a third of the clients I work with are youth athletes between the ages of, let's say, 10 and 12. I really enjoy working with younger athletes because I think when we are able to develop mental skills earlier, we see these become habits that the athlete continues to focus on moving forward. So then instead of getting to high school or getting to college even and struggling and noticing that the mental game is important for the first time, these athletes have a foundation in understanding the importance of the mental side of the game. And the key principle I always keep in mind when I'm working with youth athletes is that we want to make sure their sport remains fun. Sports are becoming more and more competitive at an early age. And it's easy for this pressure, the nervousness that they face, the fear they have about making mistakes. It's easy for all of that to take the fun out of the game for them. So when we work on mental skills, yes, it will help them perform better. It will help them have more confidence. But above anything else, it will help the young athlete enjoy their sport more. And the more they enjoy it, the more chance they're going to have of making their varsity team in high school. The more chance they're going to have of getting that scholarship to go play in college and potentially playing professionally, because they have to enjoy it to be able to stay consistent with the training they need to do, and they also have to have stronger mental skills to be able to reach their full potential. So these 5 tips will help you get your young athlete to begin seeing mental skills as important and helping them or helping to guide them in the right direction to begin strengthening their mental game. And so tip number 1 is you want to help your young athlete always focus on what they can control. I was working with a young swimmer who was dealing with a lot of performance anxiety. Before his races, he was worried so much about what other people thought of him. He was worried about what his time would be. He was worried about how well the opponents would do. And all of that was out of his control. And the more he thought about those things, the more he focused on them, the more anxious he became. And then the more stiff and the more tense he swam. And this caused him to underperform. There was another young athlete I worked with who was dealing with a lot of negativity from his coaches. The negativity from his coaches was out of his control. The trash talk from his teammates was also out of his control. It was just a pretty toxic environment that he was in. And I also worked with another young softball player who was dealing with a difficult time of moving on from mistakes. When she was pitching and she started to walk some batters, she would get really upset with herself. When she was hitting and she struck out or got out, she would get down on herself. But those past mistakes were out of her control. In all 3 of those examples, we see athletes who are focusing on things out of their control, and that focus causes them to experience negative emotional states, and it hurts their performance. But on the flip side, when an athlete is able to focus on what they can control, whether that's in terms of preparation, whether it's in terms of what they can control following a mistake, or in terms of what they can control about handling feedback from coach or trash talk from teammates or opponents, they're going to be in a better mental state and they'll perform better when they're able to focus on what they can control. So one of the ways you can help your youth athlete focus on what they can control is getting them to make a list of everything that is within their control about playing well, from preparation all the way to what they need to do during the game and what they can even do after the game. And then help them set controllable goals going into practices and games to start building this habit. Tip number 2 is get them to focus on positive self-talk. Within sports psychology and within the mental coaching that I do, self-talk and our thinking in general is incredibly important because the way we think when we play impacts how we feel and it impacts our actions. If you have a young athlete who is thinking negatively about themselves and they're thinking things like, I hope I don't make mistakes, or coach will be really mad at me if I mess up, that thinking will create fear, it will create timid play, it will create tense play. Ultimately, we're going to see that negative thinking cause them to underperform. But also if they beat themselves up really badly after mistakes, or they fixate on bad things that happened after the game, that will lower their confidence and that will slowly take the fun out of the game for them. So you want to talk to them about the importance of thinking positively, not just because it will make them feel better, but because it's going to help them play better. And when they realize that thinking positively helps them play better, then we're going to see the positive impact of it helping them feel better too. But a lot of times with younger athletes, they're going to think more positively when they see a direct connection between thinking well and playing well. So one of the things that I encourage you to do, or an exercise that you can walk them through, is have them think about how they think when they're playing well, and then how they're thinking when they're playing poorly. And we will see a separation there, right? We'll see a certain type of thinking present when they're playing well, and we'll see a certain type of thinking present when they're playing poorly. And then you want to help them see and recognize that it's not a coincidence that they're thinking positively and they're thinking well when they're playing well. There's a reason that happens, and it's because there is a connection between thinking well and playing well. And then you can also help them create what's known as a self-talk routine, and then have them read through that going into games. It's just a list of positive statements that they can go through to begin just kind of building this positive thinking and this positive mentality as they start their game. And then tip number 3 is you can teach them to use breathing to stay calm. Now, I use breathing a lot within my one-on-one coaching, which, by the way, I know I mentioned it earlier, but if you are interested in my one-on-one coaching for your youth athlete, I've put a link to learn more about that in the description below. Now, breathing is so powerful for us as athletes because it helps us calm down physically. When we take those nice deep breaths, it will help us calm down. But also, when we focus on our breathing, it helps us stay present. And if there's one mentality that's the best mentality to have overall, it's being present when you play. Because when you're present when you play, or when your youth athlete is present when they play, they're in the moment, they're not as stressed, they're not as fearful, and they're able to just play freely. So we can use breathing to help ourselves calm down and also to help be present when we compete. So for your young athlete, there are 2 ways that I would suggest getting them to use breathing. The first is using a breathing exercise before the game begins, where maybe if you're on the car ride to the field or to the court, you can have them close their eyes for 5 minutes and just focus on taking nice deep breaths. And then during the game, you can teach them something known as count breathing, where they'll breathe in and they'll count to 4, and then they'll breathe out and count to 4. And they'll do this over and over again. This is great to do at pauses during games. If your young athlete is a baseball or softball player, between pitches, or when they're in the dugout, or when they're on deck or walking up to the plate, those are great times to use this breathing. If they play basketball, maybe a timeout or a stop and play, or when they're on the bench, that's also a great time. If they're a tennis player, before serves, before they serve, or before they receive the serve, that's equally a good time to go through this breathing exercise. But getting your young athlete to actually pay attention to and practice this rhythmic, consistent breathing will help them stay calm and will help them stay present. And then tip number 4 is helping them learn from mistakes. I work with a lot of younger athletes who are dealing with getting really upset and kind of losing their composure after they make mistakes. And we talk a ton about seeing mistakes as lessons instead of just seeing mistakes as negatives. And this is a really hard mindset shift to make because, we'll get pulled from games if we make mistakes. Coaches harp on making no mistakes, and that's all, good and fine. And of course, we don't want to make mistakes. But when an athlete fears mistakes, we will see underperformance take place. Because when we fear mistakes, we hold ourselves back. Maybe, for example, there are a lot of soccer players I work with who are afraid of turning the ball over, so they just quickly pass it off, and so they're not being as effective. A lot of basketball players will pass up shots. They won't drive to the basket. So we just see this timid play where the athlete is holding themselves back because they are scared of making mistakes. But when a young athlete can see mistakes as lessons, a lot of that goes away. So one of the best ways to help your young athlete see mistakes as lessons is to actually go through a process with them after practices and games where you evaluate their mistakes and then you learn from them. So you ask them the question, what were some mistakes you made today? And then how can you learn from them? Or what are the lessons that you can take from those mistakes? And then if they have practiced the next day or practiced the next few days, those lessons turn into goals. So let's say, for example, if they are a basketball player and they say, well, I made a lot of mistakes with my passes, and the lesson is I need to be more aware of where my teammates are, maybe their focus for the next practice or their goal for the next practice is to be more aware of where their teammates are. So now they're taking these mistakes, they're learning from them, and then most importantly, they are applying what they learn to practice. And the same thing applies to games. You know, if they have a game the next day, if they're in a tournament, they can say, okay, what's the adjustment that I want to make for today's game? But I've found that it's really in the application of the lesson where the young athlete truly begins to believe and see that mistakes are lessons, because not only are they learning something, but they're actually getting better as a result of that mistake when they're able to apply the lesson. And then tip number 5 is to help them use visualization. Now, visualization is a sports psychology technique I use with every athlete I work with pretty much, and it's where we visualize ourselves in different situations. And I love visualization because we can use it for handling pressure, we can use it to build confidence, and we can also use it to help ourselves relax. Now, the handling pressure visualization will involve having your youth athlete imagine themselves in big moments and then see themselves play well in those moments. The confident visualization or the confidence visualization is relatively similar. They'll just imagine themselves playing well in different moments during the game. And then a relaxation visualization is where they'll visualize themselves in a relaxing environment. It doesn't even have to involve their sport to help get themselves into a calm state going into the game. But visualization is so powerful because it's just a way for us, especially if we're doing the confidence and the pressure visualization, it's a way for us to practice and rep our skills outside of actual practice or an actual game. And so if your young athlete is struggling with confidence, I would really start with using some visualization to help them see themselves successful or see themselves succeed and see themselves as successful, and to go through this visualization before practices and then also before games. So those are 5 sports psychology tips for your youth athlete that will help them build a stronger mental game. Now, as I said, I do offer one-on-one coaching for youth athletes, and I've put a link to that in the description below. And I also have an online course specifically for youth athletes called the Mentally Tough Kid course, and I've put a link to that in the description below as well. I really encourage you to take these tips, maybe start with 1 or 2 of them, teach them to your young athlete as a way to begin building these foundational mental skills that will stick with them as they get older. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.